Hi everybody, welcome back to As It Goes. We're all just figuring it out as it goes. Conversations help us along the way. I'm Lydia, for those of you who are new here. I'm the founder of Reself. I wanted to have a conversation about peace as our hearts break watching the war in Ukraine unfold, and for all the people affected by this unnecessary violence. For a lot of us, we don't know what to do with our feelings of despair, sadness, fear, heartbreak, empathy, powerlessness, and even hopelessness. For others of us, we want to hide away, ignore the news, distract ourselves. However you're feeling right now is valid. This conversation is providing us with a framework and practices to use these feelings to bring more peace into the world. As peace activist Howard Zinn reminds us, you can't be neutral on a moving train. We're going to talk about restoring the humanity during crises like this, and how each one of us can be peace, which is the foundation for world peace. Honoring those who are suffering because of this violence. It's the Ukraine, it's Syria, it's Yemen, Ethiopia, and all other conflicts, war, violence, crimes against humanity, and injustices occurring around the world today. I was reading Pema Chodron's Start Where You Are this morning, which, like everything in the podcast, will be linked in the show notes. And something really stood out to me. She explained, I had an interview with someone who said she couldn't meditate. It was impossible because she had real life problems. In the meditation we're doing, we're trying to bring home the very supportive message that real life problems are the material for waking up, not the reason to stop trying. That's what this conversation is for, so we don't stop trying for peace. So we feel the hopelessness and despair, and we do something with those emotions so we don't live in those emotions. We use these real life problems as the material for peace, to breathe more peace into the world, which again starts with each of us. Nothing else creates peace other than us, other than each one of us embodying and practicing peace in our everyday lives. First, I just want to say, I want to acknowledge all of the people that are being affected, displaced, and harmed by this act of complete aggression and these crimes against humanity that are occurring in the Ukraine. We pray for peace for the Ukrainian people. We acknowledge the racism that's occurring on the border. So this is for all people involved. So the first thing is to name what we're feeling. This might sound ridiculous or obvious, but when we can name what we're feeling, We open the door. We open the door to sit with these feelings. Only by sitting with our discomfort can we actually see it clearly and disempower its hold on us. Again, like I said before in the example of hopelessness or powerlessness, we name those feelings, we feel them, we rest in them. We rest in the powerlessness we feel as we watch the news report horrific scene after horrific scene. We feel the heartbreak, we rest in it. What does that mean and look like? It looks like if we're watching the news and we see an image of a 6-year-old girl hit by shrapnel from a Russian bomb, hearing the story of the doctors who tried to save her life and who said, "Show this to Putin." It means pausing to sit with the weight of what we just heard and saw. The news cycles so quickly, moving from one tragedy to the next. It bulldozes the humanity and magnitude out of each reporting. So maybe we mute or turn off the TV. We close our eyes and we just sit with what we just witnessed, taking it all in. A 6-year-old girl, seeing the images of her in our mind, trying to be saved by doctors, needlessly killed by Putin's acts of violence. Imagining ourselves as that child's mother, as that child, relating to her pain, feeling her suffering. We put ourselves in their shoes. As we sit in contemplation, we reach the emotional and intellectual conclusion of the inhumanity of war and non-necessity of war. We name these feelings: anger, despair, powerlessness, heartbreak. And we breathe into those feelings. We don't reach for our phones or turn the news back on, numbing and bulldozing through the uncomfortable part. We have to feel our emotions, especially the uncomfortable ones, so that we may fully understand. Maybe you hear that and think, I can read an article or watch the news and understand. I don't need to feel to know. I can know just by what I'm reading and seeing. But we do need to feel. Intellectually understanding is just half of it. When we feel, we understand in our being. We make our understanding human, fully human. And that is why it's so important. We allow ourselves to connect with our humanity in this moment and make space for it. We cry, we get angry, we release. We use our emotions to empower our actions. Like I said, we rest in the hopelessness. We feel the hopelessness. We feel the heartbreak. But in moving through this process and moving through these practices that we're covering in this conversation, we're not living in the hopelessness. We're not living in the acceptance of violence and war. We're being peace. We're keeping peace alive. And it starts with feeling all of the emotions that this and crises like this stir up in our bodies, reminding us we don't have to accept violence and war as our reality. So what are those actions? Obviously, if we have the means to donate, even just small amounts, every bit counts. I've included a link in the show notes to Global Giving's Ukraine Crisis Relief Support. They work with local partners in the Ukraine, which for me, I value getting that monetary support as close to the local level as possible, like the White Helmets in Syria. Find whatever trusted organization you want to donate to, again, if that's available to you. This isn't what we're going to focus on. Obviously, donation is great. And again, if we can do it, we should absolutely do it, even just small amounts. We're going to go far beyond that because I think that for a lot of us, we sit, we feel powerless, we watch, we feel hopeless. We say, what can I do? And all we kind of can come up with is, okay, donate. It still leaves us with these feelings. There's still so much more we can do. So the other actions, which make up the foundation of this conversation, each one of us being peace. These actions allow each of us to embody peace, to be nonviolence, and be sanctuaries for peace, nonviolence, and freedom through our own way of being and actions every day. That's how we keep contributing. That's how we do the work ourselves. How we do that is what the rest of this conversation will revolve around. The other day, I was sitting in the bath reading. I got up to turn off the fan, and as I returned to my bath, I was floored by the image I was looking at. Books, tea, a candle, a plant, and a nice detoxifying mustard soak in the water. I was overcome by the visceral understanding, the combination of the emotion I was allowing myself to feel because of my spaciousness, slowness, and presence, and my logical understanding of what was going on in the world. All of those images I've taken in of what is occurring in the Ukraine right now. How blessed I am to have this bath today when millions have been forcibly displaced from their homes and are now fighting for their survival, their safety. The same thing happened the night before as I sat down to enjoy the soup I just made from scratch with all these delicious, nutritious vegetables. I took a pause before eating, acknowledging and feeling my gratitude for that one moment. For all involved who made those vegetables in my soup possible, for my safety, and simply having a full bowl of food that night when again I knew millions in the Ukraine were not as fortunate. I enjoyed the soup, like my bath, a little more than I normally would. Like I said, my gratitude was visceral. My understanding was both emotionally felt and logically known. That made it all the more real and grounding. That's the thing about moments like these. They wake us up from our everyday slumber, taking it all for granted, unconscious and unpresent. They remind us that we're all interconnected, and the most important priority is people, not political agendas or governments, economic bottom lines, or the health of the market. People come first. People are what matter most. All people, everywhere, equally. This moment is yet another awakening, calling us to revalue human well-being, which is also interdependent with environmental well-being. It reminds us that governments work for the people in our best interest and not the other way around. If the government isn't valuing people above all else, as we are currently being faced with in the United States right now, with, for example, laws passed since the last election in many states making it more difficult for people to vote, which you can learn more about in the link in the show notes and write your representatives about. It's time then that we act to solve this. People and planet are the foundations for all else in our societies, and we must not forget to value them first and foremost, take them for granted, nor allow systems to continue that oppress their well-being and potential. At this moment, you might be saying, I thought that Reself and As It Goes is about my well-being, my personal evolution. You're talking politics, kind of. What does this have to do with me and my well-being? It actually has everything to do with our personal well-being and our personal evolution and our conscious living. When we live consciously, we're awake. We are seeing everything clearly with this perspective, right? With this bird's eye perspective, with these values. And like it or not, we all live in societies. We've all made social contract agreements. And like I said, our governments work for us. So when we're asleep at the wheel and our political involvement, our governments are just as asleep at the wheel. So for our own well-being, we have to make our voices heard. And it goes on a country level, on a state level. It's the same at the global level. We live in a globalized society, again, like it or not, for better or for worse. Before globalization, we were all interconnected. We're even more aware of our interconnection and interdependence. So I think that it's pretty clear. But again, this crisis is happening in the Ukraine. We are very much involved, even though we might not be suffering directly, even though we might only see it through the lens of what does this mean for the United States, for example. But we are interconnected at the human level. As other humans suffer, we suffer. As Thich Nhat Hanh says in The Other Shore, we give places different names like America, Iran, and Iraq. But in fact, they all belong to the earth. He continues, survival means the survival of humankind as a whole, not just a part of it. Only when we can touch the wisdom of non-discrimination in us can we all survive. We believe in our separation by borders, by countries, but we are all one. The Ukraine crisis is a human crisis, as is every humanitarian crisis going on in the world today. Politics forgets this. Each government serves their agenda first and helps out with the human part second, maybe third. News frames these events in the lens of what about us, or our country, or this is doing great things for our ratings, so let's make ads for our coverage of it. So we can't forget the humanity. By feeling our feelings as we described before, we return to the visceral human experience that is the suffering of war that affects us all because it is unnecessary. People dispute what I just described and what Thich Nhat Hanh says. They'll say it's more complex than that, but simplicity is complexity resolved. Humanity is geopolitical complexity resolved. Imagine for a minute what it might look like to put humans first on a global geopolitical scale. How this could deter and even prevent situations like this from even occurring. Because at the first sign of abuse of power, we are there to rise up and to eradicate its roots. That is the future that we create, each of us, embodying peace through our being. We can all do with these feelings is allow them to affect us, to empower these visceral moments of gratitude where we slow down, make space, and are completely taken aback by how blessed we are every single moment of our lives. We can be present fully, be grateful fully, and be kind fully. What matters more than that? Imagine what that would bring to each moment of your life, to each exchange you have with another human being, appreciating how precious that interaction is, rather than just speeding through it without even considering the other person's full humanity. Because it happens. We get so caught up in ourselves and in our own lives, taking for granted the complexity of our life from our perspective, and forgetting that everyone else is living just as complex of a life. And moments like these, as we witness the suffering in the Ukraine, it wakes us up. I think that when we don't let it wake us up, that's when it's in complete vain. It's like our conversation on letting the pandemic change our lives, which is also linked in the show notes. Let this crisis affect you. Let it put everything into perspective for us. Let it change us. We hear about, this is the first time since the Cold War. This is the first time in the history of our modern world that this is happening. Forget all that, right? Doesn't mean it's not important. But again, in the context of everything we've just been saying, bring it back to the human level. Feel it in your being. Feel the humanity and the lack of humanity in this crisis. And let it change you as a person. Let it empower our individual work to be peace, to embody peace every day. Again, otherwise it's in vain. We may feel disconnected from the suffering in the Ukraine. We may be under the illusion that the only reason it actually affects us are the global ripples, the threat of nuclear attack. But it's way deeper and more human than that. We may be under the impression that the only thing this affects is politics. What does this have to do with my everyday life? What does it have to do with me? How is this going to change me other than feeling hopeless and powerless as I watch this, knowing that I can't do anything about it? But we can. Each of us can do something about it. Change begins at the personal level. Individuals are what makes up society and politics. So when we do the work as an individual, in this case, to be peace, we are contributing to that world. We are building that world through our actions. We're directly connected and able to create change because it starts with you and me. Because it starts with each of us being that change, being peace, using our voices, going to protests and peaceful demonstrations, not being neutral on a moving train. It means that we don't take for granted our freedom and our democracy. It means that we are involved in its survival. We vote, we write, we call, we demonstrate, we sign petitions, we educate ourselves. These are fragile systems that depend on our involvement. Life itself is fragile. Humanity's survival, as we're seeing, obviously with the environmental crisis that we're faced with, and now the crisis in the Ukraine, everything is so fragile, and it depends on us to be awake. Nothing is out of our hands. That is the greatest illusion, I think, of all of this. And that's why We don't want to live in those feelings of hopelessness and despair and powerlessness. We take these actions, we do these practices because that's what keeps us from moving into those feelings. So the next thing we do is we allow ourselves to fully acknowledge and revere the courage of the Ukrainians. And we allow that to go deeper. We ask ourselves in their honor, through that inspiration, because we fully feel the weight of and sit with the courage it takes for their soldiers, for their everyday civilians that have decided to defend their country, their freedom, their democracy. We ask ourselves, how can I be more courageous in the path to creating a more peaceful, just, equal, sustainable, and free world? And in my own life, how can I educate myself more? How can I be more involved? How can I have more uncomfortable conversations? How can I take actions that might make me uncomfortable at first or put me in unfamiliar territory? How can I make my voice heard through involvement? We see the courage of the thousands of Russians who demonstrated against Putin and against this war and have been thrown in jail. That is embodying peace. As we feel with these moments, again, life is so precious. And it often asks us to be more courageous in our own situations, whether it's during times of war, violence, or a global pandemic, or living our lives in our most authentic and full way. Life asks us, if we want to live it fully and be present for it all, in pleasant and unpleasant moments like these, to be more courageous every day. So we ask ourselves, how can I be more courageous every day? Maybe you want to sit with that question after this conversation ends. Maybe when you're watching the news tonight and you watch a demonstration of courage, sit with that question. I watched a young mother, Olena, on the news last night, who described how she and her young children were in a bomb shelter while her husband had taken up arms to defend the Ukraine. And she was explaining her decision to stay. And she was saying that we're all going to die someday. So she essentially would rather die in defense of her country, in this defense of democracy and freedom with purpose. And as I sat and I watched that, and then sat with that afterwards, and I tried to imagine what it might be like to face that reality and come to that conclusion, is just the epitome of courage, the epitome of being peace. And it looks different for all of us. But when we allow ourselves to feel the full weight and emotion of something like that, that's when we allow it to affect us and it lives within us. And that is how the suffering is not in vain. It's like Thich Nhat Hanh says, when a loved one dies, we're not just living for ourselves anymore, we're living for them. They're living through us. And it's not philosophy, poetry, that's truth. Olena, that woman, spoke to something in me, as I'm sure it spoke to millions of people that watched her talk last night. And a bit of her now lives in each one of us that listened to her tell her truth and her experience. When we allow it to change us, to contribute to our evolution and our being peace, that is the practice. As the Dalai Lama reminds us, we can never obtain peace in the outer world until we make peace with ourselves. This quote is a fundamental idea behind Reself. Peace begins within. He emphasizes world peace must develop from inner peace. Peace is not just mere absence of violence. Peace is, I think, the manifestation of human compassion. So, the other part of this is restoring compassion within. It starts by being compassionate with ourselves so that we can be compassionate with others. We can only be as peaceful and compassionate to others as we are to ourselves. So we have to end the internal war. And we'll go over some practices and resources to do just that. But before that, I want to address something. I've heard people reflect the disappointment that the crisis of the global pandemic, which seemed like it could have fueled such positive change, did not empower positive change as it should have. While I completely understand this sentiment and agree that it seems like much of life simply returned to the old normal instead of creating a new normal and a new paradigm, these things are slow and we mustn't give up hope. If we're disappointed, let's ask ourselves, did I let the pandemic change my life? In what ways did I go back to my old normal, to my old behaviors? In what ways have I yet to welcome in a new norm? Have I yet to try a new norm? And we ask ourselves another question. Am I willing to let this human crisis in the Ukraine change my life now? If the answer is yes, then we do the work. We do these practices we talk about here today. We let ourselves feel and sit in discomfort. We name it. We feel the suffering of the Ukrainian people. And we breathe out peace and safety for them. We transform suffering through our everyday lives and experiences. That's what being peace is. So we enjoy every blessing fully, because when each of us is present, we are present for all of humanity. No one can exist alone. Without you, there would be no me, and vice versa. We're all interbeing with each other. One human suffering, the suffering of the Ukrainian people, is our suffering. When we live this truth, we act on this truth in profound and positive ways. We hold space for everyone's humanity. We don't feed self-pity and beat ourselves up for being where we are and not being where those who are suffering are. By being fully present and grateful for our lives, awake and aware, we are living and transforming suffering for all our human brothers and sisters through our truth. If you find yourself in these moments of awakening, like my bath and my bowl of soup, out for a walk under a clear, blue, sunny, peaceful sky, be there fully aware of that blessing of that moment. Enjoy your life, peace, and freedom fully, and contribute to that for others. Wish that for others. It means deciding not to perpetuate greed, ignorance, and scarcity through our actions and being, but using where we are each moment to practice and contribute to the good of being, capital G good, capital B being, which you can dive into in our episode on self-evolution for the good of being, which linked in the show notes. A great thing that I've started to do to, for example, put my consumption in perspective, I think especially in this situation, right, where we're seeing someone else's suffering so directly, we can ask ourselves, if we're purchasing something, for example, do I really need this? Is this contributing to my well-being, my peace and my freedom, or is this something else? Is this coming from a place of feeling like I'm not enough? Is this coming from a place of greed or ignorance? Could I use this money better? And if I could, maybe I can donate that money to the Ukrainian crisis relief, for example, or to environmental NGOs. So many of us, and it's not wrong, we want to make ourselves happy, right? We want to be happy. But in consumer-driven societies, we've been programmed to believe that buying the purse, for example, is what's going to make us happy. But the fact of the matter is, it makes us happy for a week, a month, then it doesn't last. But when we contribute to the good of being, it does. We know we've done something with that choice that reflects our deepest values and our deepest truth, which is our interconnection. I find myself thinking about and adding up in my mind all of the things that I've purchased over the years that I don't need, didn't need, no longer have because I really didn't need them. And I think about what I could have done with that money if I donated it to a good cause. I'm not telling you how to spend your money, by the way. I'm not perfect with this, so, no one is. That's just something that I've started to do, and I thought that I would share that. So another way to contribute to peace for others is to invite yourself to transform a little suffering through Tonglen practice. Tonglen, hopefully I'm saying that right, is Tibetan for giving and taking. It refers to a meditation practice in Tibetan Buddhism. And I'll teach you how to do this, which I learned from Pema Chodron in Start Where You Are. Again, linked in the description. Highly recommend the book. I'll teach you how to do this right now as we take a moment of silence for Ukraine to acknowledge that right at this very moment, there are bombs going off, guns being fired, people dying, families separated, and millions living in fear for their lives. So I invite you to gently close your eyes and just sit with that truth for a moment. Taking a few deep breaths to breathe into that awareness. Sitting in this awareness, we can extend this to all humans all over the world living in war, violence, allowing that suffering to touch us, imagining the relief of the end of violence in each of these places in the Ukraine, imagining the exaltation in the faces of the Ukrainian people, finding out the war is over, peace and safety have come. Perhaps these moments you've already had the first step in Tonglen, which is flashing openness, a sense of silence, spaciousness, compassion, understanding, awareness. So we'll move on to the next step of this practice, working with texture. We're going to visualize as we breathe in, breathing in dark, heavy, hot air, suffering. And as we breathe out, visualizing, breathing out, white, light, cool air, openness and relief. So as you breathe in, see yourself breathing in dark, heavy, hot air. And as you exhale, releasing white, light, cool air. Inhale, dark, heavy, hot. Exhale, white, light, cool. Dark, heavy, hot. In, white, light, cool, out. Moving on to work with relieving a specific heartfelt instance of suffering, in this case, the suffering of the Ukrainian people. Breathing in, breathe in the pain of a specific person. Maybe it's a refugee you saw an image of on the news. Maybe it's a family you heard interviewed about being separated. Maybe it's the mother of the 6-year-old daughter who was killed. Or Olena talking about why she was ready to die for her country. Breathe in that pain. Feel that pain. Breathing out. Breathe out to that person, whatever you feel might lighten their suffering. Safety, a place to stay, a good warm meal, or simply holding them as they suffer, being there for them. Breathe in their pain, imagining it as if you were them, feeling it. Breathe out your healing mode to them. Breathe in their pain. Breathe out relief for their suffering. Breathe in the pain as if you're taking it from them. Breathe out relief for their suffering. In pain, out relief. In pain, out relief. In pain, out relief. Finally, we're going to extend that wish to help relieve the suffering to every Ukrainian, acknowledging there are millions of people feeling the same way. Breathe in the pain of the person you chose and the millions of Ukrainians in the same position. Breathe out relief for their suffering in whatever way you chose. Breathe in the suffering. Breathe out relief for their suffering. In pain, out relief. In pain, out relief. Safety, peace. In the pain, out the relief, the safety, the peace. Now we can extend that to all beings everywhere who are suffering. Breathing in the suffering of the world. Breathing out peace. In suffering. Out peace. In suffering, out peace. As you breathe, you can imagine the dark, heavy hotness of the suffering entering your body, being transformed within you as you breathe out the white, light coolness of peace. In suffering, out peace. In suffering, and on this final exhale, hold the exhale as if to extend your release of peace to all beings everywhere, dwelling in that peace. Envisioning the peace enveloping the world as if you are watching it from space. Just sit here for a moment, noticing how you feel, what's going on inside of you right now. Consider how you felt before doing this practice and how you feel after. That's Tonglen. You can practice it anytime to do something about what you're feeling as this crisis unfolds. That's how we start being peace, by giving peace instead of taking peace, taking suffering, including our own suffering, and giving peace in return. These moments tug on our hearts, asking us to remember to be peace. For the Ukrainian people, be peace, live peace, ground your being peace in purpose. Dedicate it to someone or all of the Ukrainian people. Tonglen helps us take our sympathy to empathy. Empathy is putting ourselves in the other person's shoes fully, feeling their feelings to fully understand, not just logically understand, which stops us at sympathy. My English teacher in 11th grade told us something that's stuck with me ever since. Don't say you can't imagine. That stops you from imagining, from empathizing. So imagine. Put yourself in their shoes and imagine what it is like. Feel what it might be like to live their moment, to live this experience. Then say, I can only imagine, which means I've imagined, I've made space to feel those feelings, and I know that although I can't actually experience what they are, I am imagining. And so I'm holding space and relating to your experience. I've tried. And that extends to any situation. Just as being peace begins with us, nonviolence begins with us. By each of us being peace and being nonviolence, we water the seeds of a peaceful nonviolent future. Learning about nonviolent communication and how to communicate nonviolently has been a huge wake-up call for me that I was fortunate enough to be exposed to and taught during my peace studies minor in college. I'll give you an example of how this really starts with us. Say I learn about nonviolent communication, right, in college perhaps, and practices to be peace. I take my studies into my way of being. I integrate them. They become a part of me and my way of life. Say sometime down the line I have a kid, and one day she, because these are things I do, is modeled this way of being. So she is peaceful and nonviolent and does this without even thinking about it. Perhaps it becomes her dream to be a peace activist and peace coordinator between countries. And one day she prevents a war from starting and through her training is able to help each country understand each other's suffering. And they live better together because of her work. That is peace starting with you and me. Even if that's not how it ends up, it always trickles out. Because I embody peace and nonviolence, and I interact with other beings in a peaceful, nonviolent way, I demonstrate and invite them to do the same through my embodiment and modeling and way of being. It's the same thing for you and everyone else. Nonviolent communication, as we've talked about before on the podcast, is being able to communicate during a conflict in a nonviolent way. So often we get angry at something because truly deep down it triggers our wound or made us feel like the armor we've built around us is being threatened. So we lash out, and it might even feel good at first, but then we feel like garbage for doing so and hurting someone we love. Or perhaps we begin to witness how our language and word choice is violent. We're aggressive in our communication, attacking others, undermining them, or maybe it's as simple as our word choice. Words matter. Or maybe it's nonverbal communication to the guy on the subway that just cut in front of us and we blame him for spilling our coffee. Have you ever thought about how when we compliment someone, we say, "You're killing it," or "You look bomb today"? That is to equate something good. You're trying to give a compliment with violence. So we're equating, because we all do this, violence with good. And it's really trippy when you stop and think about it. This is just being human. There is nothing good about violence. We don't need it. And when we look at the ways in which violence is so ingrained in our society that our media, our entertainment, video games normalize and perpetuate violence in a way that makes us numb to all of the unnecessary violence in the world, we have to look and ask ourselves again, do I want to be peace? Do I want to let this crisis wake me up? Whatever the problem I have with something or someone, I communicate through the following format of nonviolent communication. Fact, feeling, need, request. You can remember that, FFNR. I state the fact, what just happened. I explain how I'm feeling inside. I take the time and space to really name that. Maybe at first I'm angry, but when I sit with it a little more, I discover that I'm really actually just hurt by this person's actions. So then I state my need. What do I need in this situation? And then I share a request. What would I like to happen in this situation for resolve? Linked below is a short little video from YouTube that goes into nonviolent communication a little more. So check that out if you're curious. We can even expand this to Thich Nhat Hanh's mantras for love from true love, which are the following. Darling, I am here for you. I know you are there and I am very happy. Darling, I know you suffer. Darling, I suffer. Please help. This last one is when we could use FFNR to follow. So with the first mantra saying, darling, I'm here for you, we are just holding space for the other person, telling them that we are present fully for them. Whatever they might need, wherever they are, we're there for them. The second mantra, I know you are there and I am very happy. Simply acknowledging the full presence and full humanity of the other person. We tell them that their presence matters to us, that their presence makes us happy. Darling, I know you suffer. The third mantra cuts deeper to the truth that we all suffer. When we acknowledge each other's suffering, and then we say, let me help you. What can be better than that? darling, I suffer, please help me, is the reciprocal on our side. Being able to communicate our own suffering, especially when we think the other person has caused it. Through these, we are being peace and being nonviolence. Because these are interpersonal exchanges, the other person is offered another way of being, which is to join us in peace and nonviolence. Just try saying one of those mantras to someone you love this week. Maybe you're sitting with your partner on the couch watching the news, and that flashing openness occurs and you feel a deep awareness and gratitude for your safety, for your partner's safety, that you two are there. And so you turn to them and you look them in the eyes, acknowledging their full humanity, and you say, I know you are there and I am very happy. Just see how they respond to that. Taking this another step further, if, for example, in diplomacy, words and communication is the first step, first resolve before war, imagine what the world could be like if we actually had peace and nonviolent communication-trained people there, getting at the root of suffering between two countries. Thich Nhat Hanh often talks about this, and I think that that's an incredible necessity in not only intergovernmental politics, not only domestic politics, but within our own lives. How can we be that peace and nonviolent communication trained person there to resolve suffering, to take suffering and give peace, as our Tonglen practice creates a container for? And lastly, quickly, being freedom. Being freedom is holding space for each other, seeing each other's full humanity, just listening and allowing someone to be fully themselves, to create the space and hold the space for them to be free. Again, as we touched on, educating ourselves. Earth Democracy by Vandana Shiva is a great book talking about creating a living, thriving democracy that is just and sustainable and peaceful. Lastly, again, being freedom starts with giving yourself the freedom to be your full authentic self and doing the work to reach that space, because when we are free, we invite others to be free with us. We share space for others to be free. We can hold that space. Just as we can only be as compassionate and peaceful towards others as we are compassionate and peaceful towards ourselves, it's the same thing with freedom. We've seen through all these practices, it's human first. It starts with us, and those practices, other than educating ourselves and standing up for our rights and being involved and awake, have nothing to do with politics. It's all about our humanity, because each of us, individual humans, our collective humanity, humankind, our human family is the foundation for everything else, and it's that simple. I hope that you found this conversation helpful. I hope that these practices help you move through whatever you're feeling and give you a sense of empowerment and purpose in these times that seem so disempowering and without purpose. I encourage you, as I'm doing whenever you watch the news, again, take those pauses, mute it, turn it off, and just allow yourself to feel the full weight of what's going on a very human level. And practice Tonglen. Breathe in and take that suffering for those people, for Ukrainians and breathe out peace and safety to them. The best thing that we can do is be active. So I just really wanted to have this conversation. I thought that was a really important discussion and perspective to share as we watch this crisis unfold and our heart breaks. And to put to use, to put to practice and share all of my peace studies training, just as Reself is my putting into practice my philosophy training and degree. It's the same thing. As we say at Reself, it's not enough to know. It's what we do with what we know that matters and makes a difference. So I hope that as this conversation invited me to embody and continue to practice being peace, it invites you to do the same and to discover new ways to do that. So just keep holding space, feed peace in your own being, be peace, and let this crisis touch you fully, your full humanity, and let it change you. Thank you for joining me, holding space for this conversation and energy. If you like these conversations, you can support the podcast. The link is in the show notes. Take care and feed peace. Until next time. Bye, everybody.